many of us, so don't be too afraid. So we'll just do a Mool Mantar Jap and then we'll start. वाहिगुरु साहिब जी एक ओंकार सतनाम करता पुरख निरभउ निर्वैर अकाल मूरत अजूनी सभं गुर प्रसाद जप आद सच जुगाद सच है भी सच नानक होसी भी सच गुरु प्यारी साध संगत जी गाज वार के फतेह प्रवान करो जी वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह साध संगत जी if anyone is shying away आगे आ जाओ a little bit be nice to see everyone if not it's cool. So, with Guru Sahib's Kirpa, this week, on the previous week and a half, if you like, is a really important week within Sikhi. Obviously, we had Bandi Shura that we were celebrated, but also something that we celebrate every year for the first 10 or 11 days of November is the Delhi genocide. I understand that 71% of Shaheed lives given for the freedom of India were by Sikh, and that was at a point where we were a minority to the extent that we were only 2% of Indians. Now that's very, very disproportionate compared to what you'd expect. 2%, a community that represents 2% of a country, giving over 70% of the sacrifices for one's independence. But that's no problem. As Sikh, we're not here to ask for proportion, or we're not here to boast about it. That's fine. But it's important to know these things as we go forward and the deal that was given to us. So India and Pakistan was created. There's a lot of politics that you can read about. The Muslim League by Jinnah. You have Baldev Singh, who is probably the main person at the table for the Sikhs, and he had his own interests as well, being a businessman. There's a lot, but we won't go into that today. I can offer you some reading if you are interested with regards to that. But in essence, England wanted to get out as quick as possible, so they called in this man called Radcliffe. And he created the Radcliffe Line within 5 weeks without having never even visited India himself. So 40% of Sikhs became refugees, and there was over 1 million people that died from the moving from Pakistan and to India within that initial demographic of Punjab, because obviously all the Sikhs wanted to come into what was known as India, and all the Muslims were trying to get out the east side of Punjab into the west of Punjab in Pakistan. Now, it's important to understand what the Congress and the government at the time commented with regards to independence. And Nehru himself, in a Congress meeting in Calcutta about a year before we gained independence, said that the brave Sikhs of Punjab are entitled to special consideration. I see nothing wrong in an area and a setup in the north wherein the Sikhs can also experience the glow of freedom. So these are important things, big statements and big promises he's making to the Sikh, to say that these guys have fought so much for the country. There's nothing wrong with them experiencing the glow of freedom, having fought so hardly for it. Gandhi as well, who is deemed and hailed as the father of India, quite wrongly so. Let God be the witness of our bond that binds me and the Congress to you. Our Sikh friends have no reason to fear that it would betray them. For the moment it does so, the Congress would not only thereby seal its own doom, but that of the country too. Moreover, the Sikhs are brave people. They know how to safeguard their rights by the exercise of arms with perfect justification before God and man, if it should ever come to that. There's a lot in there to understand that Gandhi himself is saying that the Sikhs are justified, not that he's anyone to justify it, but from an Indian perspective, saying that these guys know how to defend themselves and they should defend themselves if it ever comes to it. And this is something the Indian rhetoric goes back on very, very soon. So we see Punjab basically split in half initially, left side, right side, east and west. And it's important to understand that as soon as 1947 happens, Sikhs are dismissed from the onset, even to the extent that we're not accepted and we're not understood as a different religion, even till today under Article 25B, and in particular the Hindu Marriage Act, we're classed, and Jains also and Buddhists are also classed under this as well. I've got it here somewhere actually. Here it is. That we are just sub branches of Hinduism, which is obviously incorrect in every sense. So right from the offset, we're treated differently and we're not given anything as promised. And it's important to understand here that Sikhs weren't asking for a bigger piece of the pie. We're just asking to be treated like everyone else. Even though one could argue, and one should argue really, that we should have been given a bigger piece of the pie. So if you look at Punjab as a whole, and a lot of these stats are very similar today, 75% of the water, 70% of Punjab's revenue is all taken out of Punjab. So each state is allowed to govern itself, kind of similar to America, but everyone has to buy in to Delhi or Washington in their example. Central investment is unproportional, and only 1% of central investment is given to Punjab, where 70% of Punjab's revenue is going to Delhi. So right from the offset, something doesn't add up. We have a first attack on Darbar Sahib in 1955, where the Indian Army attacks and 12,000 are arrested. Operation Black Thunder. And that was to try and suppress the Punjabi Suba movement, in which was the founding movement of the Anandpur Sahib resolution. Here people are asking for their own rights, for Punjabi to be accepted as a taught language within Punjab, for fair water rights, for fair investment for Punjab, for the Bijli to stay into Punjab. I bet many of us have been to Punjab and still the Bijli goes off, which is ridiculous, given that a lot of Bijli for the surrounding areas to Punjab is made in Punjab, but it's being outsourced. And now none of us, when we go to Punjab, we don't drink the water, right? Which is ridiculous because 75% of water from Punjab, fresh water, is being diverted out of Punjab. And there's a great documentary I'd all highly recommend you watch. It's called The Final Assault. And that actually talks you through how the central government has been diverting resources away from Punjab for many, many years, and the extent to which they've gone, building separate canals that lead from Punjab all the way to Delhi. So what ends up happening is that Punjabi Suba leads to the truncation, where Punjab in itself loses Himachal Pradesh and Haryana. And the most ridiculous part of it is that Chandigarh is made Punjab's capital, but Chandigarh isn't even in Punjab officially, which means the government takes control of Punjab because it's a territorial state. So there's a lot of things that the government are doing, the state is doing, in order to keep Punjab under its firm hand. So tracking forward, and we're missing out a lot of important bits here, but just for the time, tracking forward to 1971, the prominent Sikh figures come together at the point, political and spiritual, and realize that these guys really aren't listening. It's been 30 years now. Everything they'd promised has been ignored, but let alone everything that had been promised for extra things, we're not even getting fair treatment with regards to other states, and we're being singled out for our resources and exploited. So the Anandpur Sahib resolution is drafted for 2 years it takes. And this resolution, if you haven't Googled it, I highly recommend. The demands are very, very simple. Basic rights for any state that is allowed to govern itself, and for the prosperity of that state as well. These things would be vital. Things like fair water distribution, electricity, the Punjabi language being accepted in most schools as a first language. So all these things we have to fight for. Even Harmandir Sahib being broadcast live was part of the Punjabi Anandpur Sahib resolution. So things we take for granted now, even having a satellite dish in Harmandir Sahib, we have to go into the streets for and protest and be arrested and even give our lives for. So this is not met with any favor from the state, of course, and the narrative will always say that 1984 was a last-minute solution. Here we can see more than 12 years of negotiations that fell on deaf ears. And then we even have state-sponsored massacres, state-sponsored meddling. One of the most prominent dates being the 1978 Nirankari massacre, which took place at Harmandir Sahib on Vaisakhi, where 13 Singhs were shaheed after people were sponsored to cause trouble with Harmandir Sahib and around the area, and also backed by the police. So this finalizes in what's called the Dharam Yudh Morcha, where over 250,000 people courted arrest. You can imagine how many jails that would fill up in England. 250,000, these numbers are easy to think about, but if you try and visualize 250,000 people, it's no joke. So that was your armed Punjabi. That wasn't just a so-called, an Amritari or a Khalistani. This was average person in Punjab getting involved in this movement for their livelihoods and for the future of the Punjab. Now, in 1982, Taram Yudh Morcha was basically an agitation, a protest to make people listen to what was happening and the demands of the Anandpur Sahib resolution. And Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was one of the most prominent figures for this. So a few things from the Anandpur Sahib resolution: the decentralization of power. So let Punjab govern Punjab as every other state does. And again, give us our capital back. Imagine Paris was the capital of England. How ridiculous that would sound, right? But this is what the state was able to get away with. The redistribution of wealth and resources. Second language of Punjabi for neighbouring states of Punjab. So Haryana and I think it was UP. That was formerly part of Punjab. But now they weren't even allowing, let alone the first language of those states to be Punjabi, not even the second language of those states to be Punjabi. So not only attack on Punjabi's livelihoods, but also our language, which feeds in directly to Sikhi, as we know, because Gurmukhi and Punjabi are linked. And then again, fighting Article 9, point 9 on that resolution was Harmandir Sahib Kirtan to be broadcast. So here, it's really important to understand that no word of Khalistan has come up. As my good friend here is thinking, that's meant to be like, you know, where's the Khalistan bit? Not even just Sikh, right? General Punjabis, the livelihood of general Punjabis. Now, the narrative that everyone loves pushing, Indian nationalists or anyone that sympathizes with the state in that sense, is that these guys are Attabadis. These guys wanted their own place, and we had no other option, and we did a noble thing by flushing them out. But if you look at the previous 20, 30 years, no one's even talking about a separate state. People are talking about basic human rights that the armed Punjabi was getting involved with. So let's look towards Indira Gandhi, because she's obviously the main player on the attack in Delhi and Harmandir Sahib. And it's important to know who her father was. And there's an important letter that he sent to Indira Gandhi while she was studying at Oxford with Margaret Thatcher. And the letter goes something like this, is that for the sake of a group, a person can be sacrificed. For the sake of a crowd, a group can be sacrificed. For the sake of a city, a crowd can be sacrificed. For the sake of a nation, for the sake of an area, a city can be sacrificed. For the sake of a nation, a race can be sacrificed. So right from the offset, she's been taught to have a mindset that at any means, I do not fail. In terms of her personal gain as well. Now, she actually committed electoral fraud, which is a lot of people don't know about her. She's hailed as the mother of India. But she actually lost the election. And from 1975, after losing the election, before she handed over office, she called a state of emergency in which all of government's powers are absorbed and leaded as a dictator. And she was even committed to electoral fraud in the Allahabad High Court. And out of protest, the first ones to protest against this were the Sikh, in which 40,000 Sikhs courted arrest. So right from the offset, we were a thorn in her foot. Not because we had anything better to do, but because we were the first ones that would go out and call a lie a lie. And the worst thing is that as she came out the other side of it, the fraud was forgotten about, and it was labelled a campaign to save democracy. And you'll know from the crazy WhatsApp videos and all the rest of it, how easily media manipulates Indian people, or even Punjabis, right? And that is a fair case of that. We also have, I'm just trying to build a picture here of why Indira Gandhi maybe disliked the Sikh, or what she had against the Sikh. So she was very unpopular after this. A lot of the Indians knew, and she needed a new movement to make her more popular. She needed something to gain the polls and to win over the hearts of most Indians. And we come to 1975, the 300th anniversary, Shahidi anniversary of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Maharaj in Delhi. And there's a massive Diwan called. And this speech is really important to understand. Sant Kartar Singh Ji, the leader of Damdami Taksal before Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, who was very, very prominent in leading a lot of morcha against Indira Gandhi and for the justice of Indians, not just Punjabis. When she entered the Darbar Sahib, all the MPs, all the Congress members, all the Sangat stood up in the Hazuri of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and he was the only one that sat down. And after her speech, he came up and he said this. He said that we want to ask Indira Gandhi, who achieved the rule of the Delhi government, if you have come here to prostrate to Sri Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, you have done no great act. If Guruji had not become martyred, the master of this throne would have been a Muslim, and everywhere all would have been greeted with Salam Alaikum. You yourself would have been under a burqa. The number of hairs that are on the body of the PM, even if she was to cut her head off that many times and place it at the feet of Guruji, she would still not be able to remove the debt owed to Sri Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. Regardless of how powerful the PM, no one is more powerful than our Guru. She should prostrate to our loved one, the light of the 10 kings, Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and not require that we get up and repay respect to her. So obviously, she's sitting right next to Sant Kirtan Singh Ji as this is being said, and it's obviously rattled a few feathers. But this is also important to realize that no matter who's sitting next to us, no one comes in front of Guru Sahib Satkar. Let it be the Prime Minister of India or the Queen of England. And following this, there were Jakare from all over the Darbar Sahib. So she's obviously been embarrassed at probably the biggest event of that decade within India. That's also something to bear in mind. So there we hear about June 1984, and I'm just going to go over very, very briefly what led to June, and then you'll see as a result what led to November. So we see the Taram Yudh Morcha led by Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, where things had ramped up, 250,000 Punjabis courted arrest, and it got to the point where there was no more room in the jails. As people weren't listening, and it's also important to remember, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was also arrested as well, I believe in 1982. So the rhetoric quite often is that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was leading these band of militants, and we had to go and flush him out. He was arrested 2 years prior to that, and nothing happened. And he also said himself he'd willingly go and speak to anyone that had a question. And many news reporters, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, all came to the top of the Langar hall at Harmandir Sahib and had questions with him. And they were welcomed and fed Langar as well. Now, just going forward, the important point there is the shipments, the grain shipments outside of Punjab were to be stopped as part of the Tarim Morcha on the 3rd of June. Now, this would have meant a lot of India going hungry because of the supply that comes from Punjab on a daily basis. So bear that date in mind. Now, again, just attacking and rebuting the standard questions of, oh, it was a last-minute attack. That's probably the biggest thing you hear from the government white paper, or even sympathizers. We have evidence that the SAS, led by Margaret Thatcher, were ordered to create an army, a model replica of Harmandir Sahib in the Doon Valley, in the hills north of India, in which SAS soldiers instructed Indian army personnel on the best way and the most efficient way of causing damage at Harmandir Sahib. This is 2 years prior to it. Then we even have 1983 in Chakrata Hills. The Sunday Times recorded in 1984 that 600 army personnel had been training there a year prior. So this is something that was brewing for a very, very long time. Indira Gandhi did not instinctively think that she needs to save India and attack Harmandir Sahib, and just so happened to kill many, many innocents at the same time as a result of democracy. That's total false. The government white paper states that the government was convinced that this challenge to the security, unity and integrity of the country could not be met by normal law and order agencies at the disposal of the state. And we see from the evidence here that there were many, many attempts for them to resolve the issues by sitting at a conversation. But quite often from the history, we realize that it was Indira Gandhi that did not want to have the conversation itself. And there were around 15,000 army personnel to capture a few hundred militants. What was the need for such excess force? So I'm just going to go through a few quick myths, because these myths don't only reply to June, they also refer to the general genocide. So one of the myths was that it was a last resort. This was General Sinha. General Sinha is really important to understand. There was 3 generals that were given the operation. General Sinha, I'm going to forget the other one's names now. General Brar, and I can't remember the third one. Sanji? General Vedya, thank you. Those 3 were given this attack, and General Sinha said, I'm not doing it. He basically said that there's no way this is legal, and he actually backed off and said, I'm not doing it. He even offered himself to go in respectfully and speak to Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. And as soon as he offered that and mentioned it, he was taken off the attack. He said the army action was not the last resort, as Prime Minister Indira Gandhi would have us believe. It had been in her mind for more than 18 months. Short after the Akali agitation of 1982, the army began rehearsals of a commando raid near Chakrata Cantonment in the Doon Valley, where a complete replica of the Golden Temple complex had been built. Another training involved Aviation Research Centre commandos, was given up in the Sarasava area, and Yamunabad in helicopters converted into gunships. This is the Indian general arm of the army, who himself was asked to lead this attack. Again, Sanji Singh was a terrorist, and Vandana Shiva, a Hindu lady who actually talks about the attack on the fields of Punjab in her book Violence of the Green Revolution, she says that the most ardent followers of Sanji in his first phase of rising popularity were children and women, both because they were relatively free of the new culture of degenerative consumption, and they were worst hit by the violence it generated. In the second phase of Sanji's popularity, men also joined his following, replacing vulgar movies with visits to the Gurdwaras and reading the Gurbani in place of pornographic literature. The Sant's following grew as he successfully regenerated the good life of purity, dedication, and hard work by reviving these fundamental values of the Sikh religion's way of life. The popularity of Sanji in the countryside was based on the positive sense of fundamentalism as revitalizing the basic moral values of life that had been the first casualty of commercial capitalism. So that sounds like the least thing compared to a terrorist. Someone that's basically bringing people off pornography, drugs, alcohol, and violence and attaching them to Sikhi. So General Sundarji, who was another main general, he said, we went in with humility in our heart and prayers on our lips. And Mark Tully and Satish Jacob, who were eyewitnesses to the account, recall Karnal Kaur talking about her experience of being in Harmandir Sahib. When people begged for water, some Jawan soldiers told them to drink the mixture of blood and urine on the ground. So I could give these slides all day. The literature is there to read, and it's quite sad enough that we as a community are not well versed on this. Because when we are asked, we're just said, "Oh, Sanjay Nelson was a bad person." Of course they weren't, but unfortunately, when we're talking about refuting a government, it's not enough to just say Khalistan Zindabad and let that be, right? As much as I'm for Khalistan, we have to be clever about these things and also literate with these things as well. So I urge you, if anything not, please go and read upon all of these accounts, because they're just sitting there waiting for us to learn about these things. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Again, over 40 Gurdwara were attacked on the same day as Harmandir Sahib. Why did they choose to attack on Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shahidi Purb? Why was it that many people were allowed into Amritsar and also Harmandir Sahib, but there were no outgoing trains or coaches, and no one was allowed to leave Harmandir Sahib? We have the attack on 1984 in June, and then we also have over 250,000 Sikhs killed, displaced over the 8 coming years in an operation called Operation Shuddhikaran, which is disgusting in every sense of the word. Shuddhikaran, Shuddhi means to purify, Karan means to do. So they call this Operation Shuddhikaran, and the essence of what they wanted was to rape as many Sikh women as they could in order to purify our bloodlines, i.e. dilute it, so that a Sikh cannot trace his lineage back to the Guru Sikhs of the past, so that these guys would no longer even know who they truly were. So now we come to 1984, just very, very quickly, in October. Now Indira Gandhi used this as her scapegoat to protect India from these crazy militants that wanted to break away from India, the motherland of these people, which is very, very far from the narrative. The one thing on Khalistan we hear before 1984, before the genocide, was that Sanjay Nelson said that we're not fighting for Khalistan, but if it's offered to us, we won't make the same mistake as we did in 1947. So we hear the assassination on Halloween in the morning by Satwan Singh and Byan Singh, who were the bodyguards of Indira Gandhi, and Kair Singh, their Mamaji, who helped plan it. Now, over the next coming days, up until, in particular, the 10th, 11th of November, we see the equivalent. For any of you that have studied probably GCSE history, you would have heard of the Kristallnacht, in which Jewish shops were burnt all over Berlin and Germany by militant Germans. We had a very similar thing, if you want to compare it to something, in Delhi, where Sikh businesses livelihoods, houses were targeted. No matter what age you were, people were killed and attacked. And over 200 Gurdwara in Delhi were attacked. 200 Gurdwara. And it wasn't just in Delhi, there was outrage all across India, across 18 states. Now, quite often these are labeled riots. These were not riots. This was an organized crime, an organized genocide. And the People's Union for Democratic Rights, who are banned in India, the worldwide organization, in their paper, Who Are the Guilty, that targets this specifically, they say that far from being a spontaneous expression of madness and out of popular grief and anger at Mrs. Gandhi's assassination as made out to be by the authorities, were the outcome of a well-organized plan marked by acts of both deliberate commissions and omissions by important politicians of the Congress at the top and by authorities in the administration. So their findings suggested that there were certain things told by the people at the very top to have been done, and there were certain things, certain omissions to turn a blind eye to as well. And another way to think about this, and this is probably the most important thing, Murray, on his reflections on 1984, a British man, said that if the assassins felt that Indira Gandhi was actually causing the destruction of the country, which she was by attacking Indians in their own place of worship, they were morally compelled to protect India by doing what they did. Their act of violence can actually be viewed as an act of Indian nationalism. So Satwant Singh, Beyond Singh were actually living up to the rights of India by protecting India from a dictator. And that's a very important angle or viewpoint to see things from. So let's talk about the pre-planning. This was not a spontaneous attack. We see many prominent MPs attend a Congress meeting that night. And Joginder Kaur, who talks about her experiences in Palam colony, said that the mobs were otherwise appealing and apprehending and killing Sardar Singhs. A mob they had come across pleaded with the police officers to hand them over Joginder Kaur's 2 sons, or else they would be putting them into a loss of 500 rupees each. So a mob that were attacking Sikhs. There were some police officers that actually protected Sikhs. There were 2 sons of Joginder Kaur behind these police officers. The mob came and pleaded with the police officers to say, please give us those 2 sons. If you don't, we're going to lose out on 500 rupees each. Now, this is one of the many factors that suggest that this was state-sponsored and actually paid for as well, with rewards. And we can trace this back to the time of Zakaria Khan in the 1730s, where there was a price of 50 rupees on a Sikh's head. Trilokpuri, Block 32 in Delhi, was probably one of the most worst places hit. Almost all Sikh males were killed. And the Nanavati Commission comment that the streets of Trilokpuri were littered with limbs of bodies. Ganj Sahib in Delhi, one of the main Gurdwara that India glorifies today. 200 armed Sikhs came out with naked swords and the police intervened. Rakabganj again, 4,000 people came to attack within 5 hours. There was a lot of widespread fake news in order to try and scare people. We had personalities like Amitabh Bachchan coming on Doordarshan television saying "Khoon da badala khoon," that blood for blood. There was fake reports of trains of innocent Hindus coming from Punjab to Delhi to try and turn the narrative against the Sikhs from the general population. If you look carefully there, you can actually see a young boy in a patka being burned alive for the fact that he kept his case and he had faith in Sikhi. This is Mother Teresa going through Block 32 and seeing blood spilled everywhere and limbs everywhere as well. Now, in terms of fighting back very carefully, one of the reasons that this is suggested it's systematic is because, as you do here, if you have a gun license and also expert army personnel, they're all recorded. The police went out and disarmed all of these people with the lies that if you guys are holding your weapons, if you guys have your karpana, if you guys have your guns, we can't defend you because you might attack back. Therefore, give us your weapons and we'll protect you. But we can't if you guys are fighting back. So this is one of the very, very clever ways that police disarmed Sikhs so that they were vulnerable and without shasted. So it's important, and I very wanted just to really, very in a summary, just to summarize what happened in November. There's obviously so much more that goes into it, but it's important that we remember these days and we learn from these days as well. One of the most important things there is that we truly cannot have any faith in any government authority. Those people that we pay to protect us through taxes can even turn our backs on us as well. So it's important to keep shasted. And there are accounts of a few amount of Gurdwara that had people came out that didn't surrender their weapons. And when the mobs dared to come, they all ran off. Because these knew these guys are armed and they dare not attack them. And for those of you that might remember the riots in England a few years ago, quite often they were singing or standing outside Gurdwara with shasted, and no one dared to attack them. So keep your shasted close, and do not keep faith in anyone else as well. And it's important to remember this is nothing new. This isn't, I don't want Sangat leaving here feeling bad or sad. We just need to face reality and learn from it, and also be inspired by it as well. The fact that this wasn't an isolated incident, that the government was so scared of the spirit of the Sikh that they had to go to such an extent and use such resources to try to suppress us, in which they still fail today. That's something we should take inspiration from and reflect on quite often. Whether it was the Vardaka Lukara, Shotaka Lukara, the British, and now the Indian state. And we can also think about Avir Bhai Jagtar Singh Ji Jol, who still, after 4 years of injustice with no case being proved upon him, still withering away in Chardigla, I should mention, in the prisons of Delhi. Now, just a few things on current battles. I can't emphasize enough, if you haven't watched that documentary, The Final Assault, please go onto YouTube and watch it. But we're seeing Biadabi, state-sponsored Biadabi. Even the man that was caught on the border recently, he was traced back to other people that have said that they'd been each paid 20 to 30,000 rupees to go and do these things. If you imagine how many poor people there are in India, that's, a lot of money for someone that's pushed in a corner. So they're finding these vulnerable individuals that probably don't want to do these things, paying them, bribing them in essence, to go and attack our Guru Sahib. And that's also a slap in the face to us, that we should have Peredar, and also we should fight back and namaskar to the Nihang Singhs that actually put some dar in these people by sorting out that person that dared to attack Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Maybe the tide has turned slightly now as well, but that was long overdue. We see grooming within the UK, and also the grooming, not in a girly sense, obviously that happens as well, but the grooming of our children. In Punjab at the moment, Christian missionaries are grooming kids, and they don't even know it. There's also the grooming of our history. We were in Punjab 2 years ago with Lions MMA, where an amazing camp happens at Anandpur Sahib. And a few of the things they were telling us about how they're trying to distort history within Punjab schools. And they told us about the Battle of Chamkaur and the narrative that they try and push. And it said that some books even wrote that Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj left Battle of Chamkaur and was scared for his life, and therefore surrendered and left Chamkaur Sahib. So we're being attacked from all fronts. Farmer suicide, farmer and female infanticide, Punjab conversions, alcohol and drug, the narrative that's created between Sikhs to be these funny guys that are just comedians and drink sharab all day on Bollywood and through all these other media outlets. Pesticide use, the attempt to change our history and beliefs. Water poisoning. Punjab has the highest rate of uranium poisoning within their water within the world, because farmers aren't getting the water they require, so they're having to dig further and further down into the ground. And for anyone that studies geography, you'll know that the further down, the water is fresh to a certain extent within the earth, but the further you go, the more toxic and poisonous it becomes. And the further and further you have to go within your well, the worse the water becomes. Punjabis drink that, and that also goes into the food, which also ends up into Punjabis' bellies. And we're also seeing the suppression of freedom of speech in other countries, whether it's posts being censored, whether it's people being picked up. These things are still real and happening today. And also we have the Kisan Morcha. That's the Final Assault documentary. I can't recommend that enough. Please do watch it. And make notes on it as well. When we're learning these things, don't just have the Sunday Sikh mentality to go and just, oh, that was nice, that was good, right? Make notes of these things, pass this information on, have it stored so that you know where it is in the future. And let's change our mindset to such an extent that we're not just listening to these things for our own sake, but we're listening to these things to preserve them. And if you think about you're listening to something to teach someone else, you'll listen to it in a very different way. You won't just enjoy it. Of course, enjoy these things when it comes to itihas, but don't take shortcuts, because there's no reason there can't be 10, 20 speakers for Basis of Sikhi or anyone else, right? The only difference, I guess, between myself and you guys in a sense is I've just read the book and I made a note of it and I put it into a PowerPoint. That's the only difference. There's no reason we shouldn't all be doing that as individuals as well. And if you sin, I try to creep a message in at the back. You might have seen the picture I've used throughout of this, and that was on purpose. That's the picture of Sukha Singh Matab Singh. The reason I've put that picture in is because that was probably the one of the most gloomiest parts of our history, where the Singhs were in jungles, Harmandir Sahib had been taken over, and we had prostitutes dancing in the Parkarma, manure poured into the Sarovar, and people having parties there. Ahmed Shah Abdali had made it his headquarters. But even in those dark, dark days where there were around less than 30,000 Sikhs alive, you have the likes of Sukha Singh Matab Singh do the unthinkable, go into Harmandir Sahib and take off the seas of Masarangar and raise that spirit of Chardikla within the whole Panth, and from nothing creating everything. And that was probably the main part where we see a lot of Mukhi Singhs come out of hiding and actually start formulating. And within the space of 10, 20 years, we have the likes of Nawab Kapoor Singh in 1733 taking over Punjab, essentially. So, although we're in crazy times, times have been crazier, and they've been turned around very quickly. There's no reason we can't turn this around as well. So it's important to learn our itihas, reflect on it, and it will upset us, and rightly so. But wherever there's Guru Sahib, wherever there's Shabad, there's always hope. Because those things couldn't even visit a Gurdwara, but those things had Gurbani, they had Sharda, and they had the spirit, and that's all they needed, and that's all we ever need as Sikhs as well. The times may have changed, but imagine entering a Mughal stronghold and going in and taking the head of the leader off, and then coming out with his head on a spear. That's like going to Afghanistan now, killing the leader of ISIS and bringing his head back out of Afghanistan. That's the complexity and the scale to which these things did things. And it's been done in the past, it can be done now. As a disclaimer, I'm not saying we should go to Afghanistan, yeah, and attack anyone. Just an example. I need to cover my own back as well. But that was a very, very short summary of 1984 generally, and November as well. So do spare a thought, raise awareness. This year, unfortunately, I'm not sure if it's because it's been censored, but there hasn't been much on social media about November 1984. So I urge more Gurukar, Gursikhs, even myself, to raise more awareness on this and let people know. Because as soon as we start raising awareness on this, our children will not know about it. And if we start making noise about it, justice will never be brought, however that may become. So while speaking, I would have made many, many mistakes. So thank you all for spending your Sunday evenings with me and us. And I hope that was helpful. We've got a few minutes if anyone has any general questions from the Sangat. It can be about what we've gone through today or just anything Sikhi Torte, and I'll try my best to answer it. If there's any questions from the live chat, we can go through that as well. Anyone? Yeah. Most definitely, we get our victory from Gurbani and Shabad. That's what drives a good Sikh. And that's what will drive any of us to victory. And we've seen that within history, where there's been leaders, even Maharaj Ranjit Singh Ji, you could argue, where Sikhi has not been at the forefront, the victory has been very short-lived and has not sustained. Where we've had Guru Sikhs at the front, and even today, if you look at where there's institutions led by Mahapurk, there's a overwhelming difference to how successful they are. Whether it's Hazur Sahib, any of the Takht, or even Gurdwara in England, because those Mahapurk have been led by Guru Shabad and Guru Sahib themselves. If that answers the question. Thank you. Hanji Singh Sahib. Hanji. I guess, especially when you come to Sikhi, right? It's quite overwhelming, and like everyone has so much jar to make a difference. I've been through it. I came to Sikhi when I was 16, so just random. I'll show you guys a quick picture because it's on the slides. And I went through this as well. Now, what can we do? So that was me. I was 16. My mum at a party at Canada, having fun. I still have fun now, by the way. Where do we go now? I think as I've matured a little bit, we realized that there is a lot to do, but it's important not to get overwhelmed. And there's Jagraj Singh talked about this in one of his videos. It's a circle of influence. So quite often we have a circle, and the circle immediate to us is quite small. That's the things we can affect, things we can change. For example, you come to the Gurdwara and maybe starting a book club. You might think, well, that's not going to change the Panth, right? The circle of what we want to achieve is much bigger. But as we start using our circle of influence, that grows and grows and grows. It has to start from somewhere small. Even basics, look how much influence it has now. But Jagraj Singh started by making random YouTube videos that he probably thought would never amount to anything. So I think it's important we all understand that we have something to offer. No matter who you are, no matter whether you're Amritari or not Amritari, no matter how much Bharti you read, we all have a skill set we can use an asset to the Panth. I can't tell you what that is for each individual. That might be your writing skills. It might be you're great at organizing things. It might be that you have a love for Sikhi and you want to learn Gurbani and then pass that on. It could be anything, right? But I think it does start with the individual. And secondly, and probably most importantly, it starts with Sikhi. So if you want to do something for the Panth, then make yourself the best Sikh you can be. Because when the times come, we all need Gur Sikhs to lead it. And if it's not in the hands of Gur Sikhs, things will collapse very, very quickly. I think it was Sant Attar Singh Ji, Saad Singh Ji, forgive me if I'm wrong. I think it was either Sant Attar Singh Ji, Baba Thakur Singh Ji. Someone asked them, who are both very, very poor and Mahapurk, how do we get Khalsa Raj? And they replied that as soon as every Gur Sikh starts waking up Amrit Villa, the Khalsa get Raj the next day. It's Baba Thakur Singh Ji, na? So that's the easy answer, right? So it's Gyani Sher Singh Ji, for anyone that's listening to the Katha, they're very, very calm and they do amazing Katha, right? Even like they talk about these crazy things that have happened. And one of the Guru Sikhs question is like, Gyani Ji, you're so like carefree and you don't have any like anxiety about the Panth. But look what all this bad stuff is happening. And they said, you don't need to worry about saving the Panth. Just save yourself. Panth te ape jiunda rehna. So I think it's important that by developing our own Sikhi, Guru Sahib makes pathways for us. Quite often we try and maneuver and manipulate our own things. Even my own life, like we're very blessed in Birmingham. We have like a Sikhi class and a Santya class. And it started as just this like random thing. It started with, at the end of a Punjabi school, we used to do a 10-minute presentation to the kids. And one way or another, like an opportunity came to join the committee. And like honestly, it all laid out. And that was not my plan at all. My point being is if we get started somewhere, I didn't know if any kids would come to the little 10-minute class, right? And now with Guru Sahib's Kirpa, we've got over like 30, 40 kids learning Santya, and even adults have started coming. The point being, that took 7-8 years to get where it was. If we just start with Uddam, Guru Sahib will put you where you're needed. And we all have a different thing. You might be needed in the Langar hall. You might be needed doing a lecture. You might be needed creating a Sikh organization in a political sphere. So I think developing Sikhi is the first thing. Then asking Guru Sahib, say, Guru Sahib, just put me wherever you need me and just please give me the strength to do whatever we need to do. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. Hanji Singh Sahib.
What would you say about joining like political party with like trying to manipulate the whole situation?
Through the system.
Because a lot of us that I've spoken to, they said to me that sometimes it takes you away from Sikhi.
Yeah.
It pulls you out, like, once you're, at first you have a very planted mindset, but
Hanji.
when you get into politics, it pulls you away.
Hanji.
So I'm a bit confused about that.
That's
I want to go into politics sometimes, I don't.
that's a great question. I think it's the same with Gurdwara committees, right? Yeah, like no one wants to get involved in Gurdwara committees because it's panga, it's headache. I'm probably the only committee member in the UK that has like quite a relaxed Gurdwara committee, right? So if we just think about Gurdwara committees initially, the sad fact is if we don't get into them, we're not going to change anything. But what also we shoot ourselves in the foot is we come dressed like me, wearing a nice karpan and a bana and a chaggi made from India, and we don't never come to the Gurdwara. We never do any seva. We don't do Pandedi seva. We don't help the Gyanis with Sukhasim. We don't lead a Sukhmisa. We don't do the translations. And then we expect everything to change. Siane that have been here, you know what? They might not have the best Sikhi Pantik mindset, but they're here every day after working their jobs. They're the ones counting the golak. They're the ones picking the dod up from the Darbar Sab and taking it to the Langar hall. Yeah, fair enough, they might not have the mindset and the vision we have, but who are we to go and ask them? How dare we go and ask them for change? Where they're the ones living and breathing Sikhi, and we just come as a Saturday, Sunday thing and expect, a revolution to happen at the Gurdwara, right? So the first thing we need to do is get involved. And when I've seen this at my local Gurdwara, when you know the auntie that come make the prasad every day, when they see you every day, they'll fight your corner. And when Sangat, the people that clean the chadran, you get involved and help them, and you ask people, you connect to people quite often, and especially, I was at Smedic for Bandi Shore recently, and I just thought, just G like that to do a bit of Pandedi Seva. The people were doing Pandedi Seva with, and Smedic had a ridiculous amount of people, Sangat there, yeah? Very blessed. They're Afghan Sikhs or Punjabi Sikhs, all of them doing like 3-4 hours Seva, no problem. And they're the ones that just keep themselves to themselves, and we're the ones with the big mouths, right, that go around saying, we need this, we need that. Wazi pahunchte nahi Gurdwara seva karnu. So that's the first thing I'd say, and people will recognize you, and then when the chance comes for a committee election, or you have an itcha to do an initiative, they'll be like, you know what, this guy actually invests his time in the Gurdwara, he's serious about it, he comes every Sunday and helps with the cleanup, or he takes the kids class or whatever it is. So that's really important. Don't underestimate that, and without that it won't happen. Don't expect it to, yeah, and we shouldn't deserve it either. But going back to the political thing, there's a lot of different vichara on this. Some people say don't involve the government at all. I would say that to a certain extent, in an ideal situation, we could just do our own thing and attack it from the outside, right? But in order to attack it even from the outside, you need to know knowledge of the inside. So I would suggest that it's important we do have Sikh MPs, but those of that are a Pantik mindset. Now, as you get in those spheres, as with any Sangat, right, it chips away at you. So it's very important to have your Sikhi solid. And no matter where you go, if you're Amrit Vilas Pakka and you're involved at your Gurdwara Seva, no matter what that might be, even charting the Sangat shoes, right? You're grounded in your Sikhi. You could have the dirtiest of politicians come and offer you things and you won't be affected. We know loads of Mahapurk, Sant Atar Singh Ji, Sant Ishar Singh Ji, Rara Sahib wale, they were in the army. Now someone could argue that army was fighting for who? The British, the Indians. But they weren't phased by it, right? And that was also a part of their life journey for a reason. There are certain things Maharaj will give us. So by going through that political sphere, we'll probably learn so many things that we have to do, we have to know in order to create an organization for Sikh. Because if we haven't got lawyers that know the law, if we don't have politicians that know the policies, then we can just shout from the sides all we want, right? But it's easier said than done. And I appreciate it does affect the psyche. And at the same time, I do agree, if it does get too much, it's important you make that distinction. If your Sikhi is at the point where it's about to crumble because of that, then step away. But Maharaj if they've put you in a situation, they'll take you wherever they need to. And we also had 6, you could call them 6 if you wanted. What was his name? At the time, when Nawab Kapoor Singh became the Nawab, there was a Gursikh that Bhai Subeg Singh Ji and Bhai Shahbaz Singh Ji, their son that actually became Shaheed later, they worked for Zakaria Khan. And you could say, he's a traitor of the Panth. But he was actually the one that recommended the Singhs, because they weren't going to take Nawabi initially. They said, Singho, jado cheez mil diya le liya kar. We want to take Raj initially, but take this for now. Otherwise, the Singhs were saying, who are these guys to give us a Raj? And because he worked for Zakaria Khan, he actually mediated that whole process. And then he later went on to give Shahidi, and his son did as well, from Zakaria Khan. But then people could say, you know, he's a Murak or whatever. So everything's not black and white, I'd say. But there are definitely skills we can learn from other people to benefit the Panth. The Khalistan one. I'll be totally honest with you, I don't know much about it. And that's not me getting out of it. The only thing I've seen online is it's a non-binding referendum. So I think it's good in raising awareness. And also it might act as a stepping stone, because with these processes, you need some data, right? So it might act as data to say, look, we're shouting about Khalistan, someone's quoting about Khalistan, but then someone could say, well, Sikhs outside of India don't even want it, which is quite often said. Maybe this might act as a figure to say, look, there's 200,000 people, 100,000 people that have signed up. What will come of it, I don't know. I'm not sure what the next steps are. So, yeah, not too sure about it. I don't really know much about it, if I'm honest. Hanji. I believe it's a group called Sikhs for Justice, Hanji, and they've been quite vocal in a lot of legal cases as well, from my understanding. But yeah, I can't really comment much on it. I don't really know too much, Hanji. Hanji.
Games online now, as we're discussing the politics in Gurdwara committees and stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think the ideal situation in Gurdwara is that is led and headed by the Panth Pyare, right?
Hanji.
Okay, so in that case, how do you know someone should be a Panth Pyare? Like, you know what I mean?
Very good question. Like, how do you choose the leaders? And if you look at history, the leaders were chosen. That's the important part. They were chosen. Nawab Guru Singh, his seva was he used to he used to clean the poo of the kore. That was his seva. He didn't study at Oxford or anything like that, right? He was chosen by the Sangat. And as I mentioned, you know, when you get involved in Gurdwara, people will, you don't even need to go and say to someone, I want to be involved. They will force you to get involved. So I truly believe, even if you don't want to be involved, Guru Sahib will create a vidhi that if they want you to be at the front of it, they'll sort it. But again, Uddam is required. When it comes to Panj Pyare, yeah, we have a Panj Pyara system. You could say that if we had 5 committee members, Panj Pyare system ban gaya, really. Just take away the label of committee, it's the same thing, right? But those Panj Pyare have to be Rayatwan Gursikh. And technically, those Panj Pyare should be at such a level that they can do Amrit Sanchar whenever need be. So I would suggest, how do we choose, or if yourself you're unsure, there may be a case where you give yourself to that seva and you come forward. There might be a need for a Singh, and you think, you know what, I'll put myself forward, see what people say. That's fine as well. But quite often the case is that those true Gurmukhs are quite often put into the places they don't want to be in. Yeah, a good question. Hanji, Ronsi. Hanji. Hanji, so the quote is that the day the Indian army stepped foot into Harmandir Sahib, the foundation stone for Khalistan would have been laid. So yeah, there's 2 ways. You could have said that if the Gursikhs weren't there, obviously it would have been a lot worse. But at the same time, if we look at what's happened now, and even the attack, that wasn't an attack on farmers or anything, that was an attack on Sikhi, however much you want to dilute it, right? But as a result of that attack, look how much Sikhi Prachar has happened. So you can think about it that way, and I think it was Babar Singh that gave a bachchan that a lot of the Singhs that gave Shahidi or even were in Punjab will now be born in Western countries. So that's a fateh in itself. Look how many people took Amrit as a result of hearing about the Kalukara. Now, if Sanji's, don't quote me on that, I can't remember if those are the exact words of Sanji, but if Sanji in essence have said we'll have fateh, then Brahm Gyani the bachan pure hunde hai na. We just don't know what the time frame is. And Maharaj ne ape kya Raj karega Khalsa, at some point we will have Raj. And that Raj won't just be for the Khalsa, that'll be for everyone, right? And there's also a great book to read by Rama Singh's book, From Manmukh to Gurmukh. Great Bhakti wale. They were actually a Hindu, and they used to be the PA for a Gursikh in the probably 1960s time in India. And the Gursikh used to read Sukhmani Sahib every day, his manager. And he basically Sikhi na jodia. And he used to do sangat of a lot of Akhand Kirtani Jatha Singhs, like Jathedarji that passed away recently, etc., etc. And in the book, it recalls one of his accounts where he had itcha to do darshan of Khalsa Raj. And basically, in his dream, a Shahid Singh comes and takes him on this like tour of Khalsa Raj. And he says that in each, he even specifically says London, New York, in these cities, there's a Khalsa embassy in all of them. And they went to Harmandir Sahib, and they said that in Harmandir Sahib, literally, as soon as you went into Amritsar, the city of Amritsar, it's like bliss. And in Harmandir Sahib, there are tunnels of people doing Naam Simran day and night. People from all walks of life, white, black, Asian. So, Bhai Sahib even had darshan of Khalsa Raj, right? Which is quite cool. And that was recently. So Raj will come. Again, it's just Guru Sahib's ready to give their khushiyan and their power whenever we're ready to accept it, I guess, right? So it's just whenever we step up to be willing to sambal it. Because a Raj can come and it can falter very quickly. But in order to sambal it, you need a Jivan and you need a lot of Gursikhs. And then Guru Gobind Singh Ji's done loads of bachan about even at Hazur Sahib. There's a Gurdwara called Mal Tikri Sahib, where Guru Nanak Dev Ji went and stored loads of gold. And the Singhs said, the Gursikhs at the time said to Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Guru Sahib, why are you storing all this gold? What's the point? They said, Asi dasma janmach ethe aake edi lod paugi. What happened after the Jungs when Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj went to Hazur Sahib at their final resting place, is that after the Jungs, a lot of Singhs, they actually needed money for their families, right? And a lot of them were mercenaries in that sense. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj went to Mal Tikri Sahib and said, go up there and dig up all that gold. Singhs were like, Guru Sahib was a random field, right? And they said, Jaki Karlo. They found a khajana of gold that was unending. And Guru Sahib, the tal that actually Guru Sahib used, a picture on my PowerPoint somewhere, the tal they used is still there. They got a tal and they gave 2 tals full of gold to each soldier. And then there was leftovers. And Guru Sahib said, go and put it back. They said, Guru Sahib, what's the point of that? And they said, Jalo Khalsa, I think the bachan was something along the lines of, Jalo Khalsa 96 crore paunch gaya. When there's 9.6 million Khalsa within the world, the Khalsa will come here and that will provide the langar for all the Fauj that comes here that needs langar. So there's loads of these bachans about Khalsa Raj, and when you go on yatra, make sure you actually ask the Gyani Sahibs what's the itihas of this Gurdwara. I know Seek to Inspire just announced actually they're doing a yatra in August. I found out about that Gurdwara and itihas on that yatra, so I'd highly recommend anyone that's watching Seek to Inspire yatra in August. Please go, because the Gursikhs there have amazing connections, and they know the itihas of all these Gurdwara as well, which is very inspiring. Anandi Singh Haji. The August one. Hanji. Oh, the Lions MMA one. Hanji, yeah. So, Hanji? They're just sorting out with regards to Punjab, like what the situation is COVID-wise. If it is, we'll let you know. Yeah, that's an amazing experience as well. Hanji Singh sir. Hanji. Yeah. Hanji. Hanji. Yeah.
Practically, what do you do if you don't know actually how to use it? You don't know how to defend yourself, but you're still blessed with speech.
With Guru Kripa, there's quite a few Gursikhs that can teach us that it's not loads, I'll be honest. But even if you want to be practical about it, at the end of the day, Kirpan is a blade, right? So you can go to things like Krav Maga, which is a hand-to-hand combat battle that specifies with using small hand weapons, there's loads of, you don't have to get this vidhi from Gursikhs. It'd be great if we could, but there are loads of people that can teach you how to disarm someone and use your arm to defend yourself. So I just say anything that would help you in that sense is brilliant, and also any general learning any form of fighting is great. Hanji. Yeah. Hanji. Yeah. Hanji. Yeah, of course. I think ek cheez hundi Guru di kirpa. Like, if you think about the Panj Pyare, they were, in that sense, random. They come from all over the place, right? None of them ever held a Karpan or anything like that, from what I've read. And a lot of Guru Sikhs didn't. And even at the time of Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, the things that came, a lot of them were just random people, farmers. So actually, if Guru Sahib does Kirpa, you can learn Shastra Vidya tomorrow, right? That Vidya will come up Pargat within you. But then obviously we have to do Uddam as well. And at that time, we know Baba Buddha Ji used to actually teach the things how to do Shastra Vidya. Hana? We had Guru Gobind Singh Ji do Holla Mahalla every year to make sure, and that still continues at Anandpur Sahib. So even Gatka is very important because the Pantre, and even just holding a talwar that long, it's not easy, right? You need some serious forearm strength. So even things like that are really important. So we shouldn't discontinue the value of these Puratan Maryade. Hanji. Hanji Singh. Hanji. Yeah. WhyGuru. Hanji. 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 Yeah, and it's important. Like I was reading, even the bachans of like Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Surya Prakash and Guru Angad Dev Ji about the importance of Japji Sahib. Like Kart to Kart, if anyone, and this is what Savi Kavi Singh Ji writes, that Kart to Kart, anyone that calls themselves a Guru Sikh, a Sikh even, should have Japji Sahib off by heart. Now, honestly, I'm not saying if you don't have Japji Sahib off by heart, like leave the faith. Of course, I'm not saying that, right? What I'm saying is it's important to realize what the level of Sikhi was and where we are now. That's not to say, oh, don't get worried, but see that as inspiration, as our target to reach. And even to the point where Daulat Khan, who was the Nawab of Sultanpur Lodi, his sons were Gursikhs, and they were Musliman that worked for Ibrahim Khan, who was the Pathan Mughal, the emperor at the time. And even they had Japji Sahib Khan. They would read Japji Sahib every morning. So, Kart to Kart, Japji Sahib, and as Babaji said, Bani the Nal, anything can happen. And it's important to get Bani Kant as well because Tiyar par Tiyar in that sense, if all hell breaks loose tomorrow, we might be at the Gutka for a few days. There might not be any energy and you can't get your app open on your phone. Nitnem ke to hoga. So it is important in that sense to be Tiyar par Tiyar for any situation. And if anyone is thinking about how to get Gurbani Kant, I think there's some great videos on the Basics channel. But sab to vaddi cheez hunda Maharaj nu ardas karo. And there's even Gurdwara you can visit. Damdama Sahib, there's Gurdwara called Likhan Sar Sahib. Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj given the bachan that after they scribed Guru Granth Sahib Ji in its entirety, Baba Deep Singh and Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji had all the leftover ink and paper. And they said, Guru Sahib, what should we do with it? And Guru Sahib says, burn it and create it into sand. And there's a sandpit outside that Gurdwara, Likhan Sar Sahib. And then Guru Sahib the bachan that any Guru Sahib that comes here does a Japji Sahib part, does ardas, and writes their penti akkar in the sand. Guru Sahib will give them Vidya Didat and help them with Gurbani. So there's so many things we can do in that sense. That just came to mind. Hanji Singh said. Hanji. Gurmat as in like just like Sakhis. Yeah. Hanji, yeah, I think Hanji is a great question. I think the thing that really got me into Sikhi was 1984 and realizing that so many people has ke jaan ditte, people laughed in the face of death, Harmandir Sahib, and even sent their children to be sacrificed. And I saw the picture of Bibi Satnam Kaur, Bibi Varu Kaur, 6 and 8 years old. Gyani Kartar Singh Ji, I think it was the Gyani name, the father's name. The fact that so many people had given their lives for Sikhi, I just thought, you know what? Where's their names? Hanji, here you can see the two Bibiyan. They actually went and blew up a tank before it entered Harmandir Sahib, which is amazing, right? And I heard of these stories. I thought, if so many people are giving their life for Sikhi, there's got to be something behind it. So the other one was death. Like I was really interested. Like, surely we can't be in this world to just live it, and by all means enjoy it, but then for it just to be nothing, or even just to be transitory, and just for it to not amount to anything. And it wasn't. I couldn't I was quite anxious about being unsure about it. Because I thought, what's the point of this life if we're just letting whatever happen after, right? And then obviously Gurbani talks about death and Guru Sahib talks about death. And Itihas talks about death as well. And as we said in the Katha, Sadguru Sikha Halat Palaswara, Sadguru Sahib sorts out everything for their sake in this world and the next. And you hear the Sakhis of Mullah Khatri, who even in the 10th, who was a Guru Sikh of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, messed up. By the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Shikar Ghat in Hazur Sahib, as a rabbit, Guru Gobind Singh Ji actually gave them mukti. Even though they had to be liberated into a rabbit and go through that life form, because they were a Sikh of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, when the time came, they were saved. So I think those two are the probably, and obviously having Sangat keeps you honestly alive in that sense. So those things, if you keep them close, Maharaj Api Kirpa Karunge, I think, Hanji. Yeah, you know, by all means. Hanji. You laughed at, right? You're like you're illiterate if you know Punjabi.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of like from a circle of influence, circle of concern, any impact that we can have in terms of getting that, at least in Punjab, being more taught in schools. Like, so my cousin, I think like 10 years ago, the school they went to, at least like they had to wear a rumal and stuff to go to the school, and there was still some key elements taught in schools. Like, do you think for us being here, us having any influence on that, and any skills, looking at that in the circle of concern?
It really is. It really is. I would say because that experience, there's so much to say about that needs to be done in Punjab, and quite often people think it's doom and gloom, right? When we went, the biggest thing that had an effect on the kids was just us going. They looked at us and they were like, "Raw, you guys are from England." We're like, "What are you doing?" They're like, "Why are you in Sikhi?" Like, people are in Sikhi because they got nothing better to do. That's what they think. They literally saw, we didn't have to speak. That's not our Upama, that's Guru Sahib's, the Upama of Guru Sahib Sarup, right? But they thought the thing you do is you go to Canada, Australia, and England, and you enjoy your life. You forget the religion. But they just seeing us and realizing that we're successful in a worldly sense here and we have fun, that had the biggest effect on them. And the other thing they need is just pyar. They just need people to speak to. They just need someone to give them a high five. I swear that's all the kids want there. And the amount of diamonds that are sitting in Punjab, I'll give you one instance. So the Singh Sahib, the main Gyani from Kesgarh Sahib came and they did a Gurbani competition, right? And there was all these kids that went up against each other. And the winner was a girl called Komaljit Kaur, fitting name as well. She was 11 years old. Standard Punjabi looking girl, right? You'd never know she even knew anything about Sikhi. Guess how many Baniya she had gone? Who wants to guess? I've told you this before. 32 Baniya. She had she was 11 years old. She had 32 Baniya. I can't even name 32 Baniya, yeah? I'm including like Sukumni Sahib. So it's important to understand that the only way you can explain something like that is Kirpa, and she's probably a Gursikh in her past life as well, right? And even just little things like artists. We gave the kids an a drawing competition. The paintings they came out with were like, honestly, they were like professional. And the jar the kids have there is mad. Like, you know, you go to a Gurmukhi camp in England, kids are, I don't want to do Kirtan, man, all this kind of stuff, right? There were kids there that we said, whoever wants to do Tadi, Kavishri or Kirtan, to see stage the Ajo. They all ran up. There's like 200 kids fighting. Half of them have never done Kirtan in their lives. Half of them have never done Tadivara in their lives, but they just wanted to have a go. And this is in front of 1,000 kids. So that's the kind of Chardigla they have. All they need is love. Honestly, the kids there, they just need love and they need role models. We take these things for granted in England, right? Like we think, oh, Sikhi class, allow that, man. Like, I'll just watch it online kind of thing, you know? I do it as well. But we go there and you think, you know what, there's so much untapped potential in Punjab. You just have to get involved. And your sphere of influence, just go to, you know, I remember I went to a Kant part of my friend Gurdwara, and I went in a chola, right, just all time, and they gave me a saropa. They're like, I'm Mandeep Singh, and I'm going to check here, sadkar karna, so what the hell? But that means so much for them, right? That this guy's come from outside, Bella Monasi, and he's taken Amrit. like, not that I'm anyone or we're anyone, but the Saroop is massive. So I would say utte jaake Saroop da prachar karo. Show them that it is cool and we have fun, right? Asi England, we bethe and we have these fun things. And it was inspire them as well. And it will inspire them that if they do get out to England, to make them realize they don't have to compromise on their Sikhi to enjoy their life either. That's a very small thing you can do. And also, like, just go to your ancestors or your relatives and just speak to them about Sikhi. I went to my Taya and asked him what happened in Jarasi, what happened where you were. And he told me he knew Manveer Singh Cheheru, which was one of the greatest Karkus of the time. He told me about how he could fly anything, he could fly any plane, and he used to do wheelies on railroad tracks. That's how skilled he was. And I was like, go and have a conversation with them when you go there. Go and sit there and sit with the people. Get off your phone. Don't Instagram you doing this picture at Mandir Sahib, whatever it is, right? Go and experience it properly. I'm deep thinking, crap, man. That was my plan. Unblock Mandeep Singh on Instagram. So go there, speak to the people of Punjab and connect with them properly. Even if your Punjabi is not great, just whatever comes out, Nicola, Carlo, they'll appreciate it. Hanji.
These people that they got so much like birthday fathers that being born in Guru Sahib, whatever we forget how blessed they are to be there, and sometimes even there they don't realize how blessed they want to come to grow.
Yeah.
They don't realize how blessed they are to be born there as well.
Hanji, definitely. Definitely. So if you got a choice between Dubai and Punjab nu chal jaओ. Or you can go on the way. You can go on the way, na? You can go on the way. You need to enjoy life a little bit as well. Maybe voti nu puch launga. I'm only joking. Asi Punjab nu jana. But anyways, spend time, invest the holidays. I'm not saying never go anywhere else, but we have a duty to Punjab as well, right? If we call ourselves Punjabi. And the other thing the last thing I'll finish with is Bhai Harman Singh Ji said this to me when we was at the Vidyalaya for Basics. He said three things. I won't mention the other two, but one thing he said is that never think that without you the Panth won't flourish. Don't think that thode to bina Panth nahi chalna. And the way I like to think is quite often we see seva as a chore, right? You think, Pandit I can't be bothered, or whatever it is, Punjab nu jana, can't be bothered, whatever it is. See it as your chance. Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj ne ape kya Raj karega Khalsa. So that's going to happen. Guru Nanak Dev Ji started this revolution. If we get an opening, that's our chance. Whatever it is, take a Punjabi school, take the kids football, whatever it is, right? Or anything. If we don't take it, don't think that mere to bina honani, because there's probably 20 people in a queue behind you waiting to jump on that seva. And once tusi ek bari na karta, Maharaj ne hor kisi nu puch lena. And I've seen that even with my own eyes, and I've probably said no to things I shouldn't have, and then I'll regret it after realizing. So whenever that chance comes, grab it. And as friends, do it together. Because otherwise it does get lonely, I'm not going to lie. It gets lonely and it gets hard, right? But if you do things with friends, the seva becomes wicked. So that's another thing as well. Any last questions, Sanji? Hanji. Hanji.
Are there actually mutually exclusive? Like, so I'm asking that, so I'm thinking, can you really claim yourself? I'm not saying you should claim yourself. Can you really claim to be a thief if you don't have that beauty aspect, if you're not bothered about other people and to make a difference in the community? And can you actually have beauty if you're not a thief? Like, because
Yeah.
the
The latter question, definitely no. And the evidence of this is that Akal Takht, medium Piri and the Nishan Sahibs, the Pir one is about a foot higher than the Mir one. So their Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj ne jaan ke kita that make sure my Guru Sikhs never think that bhakti to bina kuch hona. So at the same time, it's probably better to be a Bhagat than a dictator without any bhakti. Huh? So yeah, that's probably the easy answer to that. Good question. As you've been saying, Raj, how we get Raj, Pir de naal Raj miloga. पीढ़ी दे नाल राज मिलोगी है ना चलो so it's lovely spending the evening with you guys. Thank you for your sangat and thank you for keeping me company. Maharaj